The Monte and Wolf Show is brought to you, of course, by eSportsBet at esportsbet.io. You can head over to the site right now, log in, and sign up with our referral code below. If you make a crypto deposit, you can get a 50% deposit bonus up to $200. You'll also get a bunch of DJT for free, which you can play with on the site. Predict games to be part of their World's Prediction Series. If you reach the highest tier, you can win up to 300,000 USDT for free, just for playing along until the end of the year. Could be in League of Legends, CSGO, whatever you want, but it's a really fun way to play. You can also get additional DJT, up to 50 per every dollar of crypto that you deposit on the site. So be sure to check it out, and we'll be having fun with predictions on Competitive Edge, League of Legends here on this channel. We've been doing very well so far this season, so check out that. Welcome to the second episode of the Monte and Wolf Show, a show about League of Legends Champions Korea, once known as Champions when I cast it, now known as LCK when Wolf casts it. This show is unofficially known as Korean Fellatio Enthusiasts. Maybe we'll just change the name to KFE. It would allow us to put more other characters in the YouTube title on the topic at hand, so good to have those very short titles. Today, we're going to talk a lot about the big matches that we had this week, because we had some really important ones amongst the top teams in the league, which in turn leads to this week's matches being kind of boring. But this was the big test for DAMWON. DAMWON Kia this week with Nuguri. Were they going to do well? Were they going to beat GenG? Were they going to beat T1? The answer was no, but they should have probably won both of those series. So we could talk about that, because I think a lot of people are probably going to be kind of down on DAMWON Kia after this week, but I feel my read on watching all of these matches, and I watched them like all in a row, was that it was really DAMWON's own mistakes, and that they were relatively fixable mistakes, I felt like, potentially dealing with gelling with this new team and this new meta. And I think they're going to be extremely strong as the season progresses, in spite of these early losses.
I agree, because I do think that in general, DAMWON Kia, they played a really strong style. I actually really like their drafting style. In particular, the Kiana pick from Canyon I thought was a really fantastic adaptation in that first game against GenG. But they just dropped the ball in setup for team fights so many times, and it usually revolved around Nuguri trying to set up an angle or trying to be a little bit aggressive on the flank instead of just trying to frontline for his team. So you're also, in the GenG series, you're also playing against a team that has stayed together and has all 5 members of this roster are superstars, right? It's a super team. I mean, look, Doran is the odd man out in that regard, but like he's still a strong player in his own right. And
I enjoy the subtle Doran flaming that we do every single episode, and we will continue to do every single episode.
Yeah, well,
I'm a Doran hater as well.
He was so good last season, at the beginning of the season in particular. He picked up so many MVPs and he was killing it. And he played both strong and weak side very well. And he was clutch. Not so much this season, but that's okay, because the rest of his team can pick up the slack. And it feels like for DAMWON, it's been 2 seasons in a row now of, okay, we're still figuring out the top lane. And it felt like with Nuguri, he would just default be pretty good with this roster because he played with most of it before. And it just hasn't been the case so far. And I think Nuguri's still shaking off some of the rust. He's also a player who, generally speaking, was a very aggressive laner, and now is playing a meta where he's like, all right, so I'm on Sejuani again. Cool. And like, he's made some mistakes in lane as well, where he's trying to punish the enemy laner. If it's like a Gangplank he's up against or a Gnar he's up against, and he just overextends and dies. And like, we've seen some mistakes there. Like, it's kind of ironic how Nuguri is very similar to Doran right now. I think he will change into a more well-rounded player as time goes on. But I think he's all like, a part of how he sets up for team fights, he's on a weird flank angle, or he's teleporting in late, or he's like splitting off and chasing down the enemy tank instead of actually focusing the carry with the rest of his team, is a product of him like being in China and doing his own thing because he can't communicate with the team.
I mean,
he's like, well, you know what? I'm just going to do my own thing.
He did kind of sprint it in lane a lot of the time last year on FPX, if you were watching those games, and it was very noticeable at Worlds, to the point where I suggested that Nuguri was actually a sleeper agent from DAMWON put inside FPX to end up in their group to sabotage FPX's group stage performance. So I will say that, I'm not so surprised by seeing some of these tendencies. The thing about Nuguri, though, is that you have to take the int in some ways, because every time he ints, he takes away some resources and then comes back in a lane and figures out of the resources he took away, whether it's a summoner spell or an ult from the enemy, he will find a way to kill you in response. So it's like he has an answer to his own mistakes in many cases, which I find very fun to watch. And I think if we reflect on, the DAMWON GenG series is very different than the DAMWON T1 series, but if we reflect on it, there was a lot of hype around Lehenz's Singed, which did do well in the laning phase of game 1, but frankly, like, this was a game that DAMWON should have won, and if it hadn't been for Unsealed Spellbook Singed Smite, support Singed Smite Steal, like, this would have been a 2-0 for DAMWON. It was, they had a clear advantage heading into the late game. They were very well primed to take this Baron, and it was more or less a miraculous steal by GenG. And then we get the third game, and that was the most one-sided game of the series, like very clear GenG win, but it was really hard for them to even get there. And I think a lot of fans are overhyping GenG because this could have easily been a GenG loss.
Yeah, it definitely could have. I also think the Singed is surprisingly pretty good.
Oh, it is
like
good.
The first time we saw it, like last season in their meetup, which is kind of hilarious, like it all comes back to this series again. We were like, okay, it's kind of funny, it's kind of a meme, it's really cool in this best of 3. It made sense, but like we'll probably never see this again, but that was kind of cool. And now it's like he's kind of made it a thing, like it's drawing bans, and it does seem quite strong. You see it in a Senna lane, he actually has items. You see it in a lane that you're not supposed to have prio in, then you get prio in it.
Well, I think that the issues with Singed are, like, as you say, Senna lanes are unlocking a lot of different styles of champions, right, around the world. There have been some really interesting picks with the Senna overall that have done very well. So you have the opportunity to get that farm, but then you also, even if you're not getting that farm, if you're playing a Yuumi or a Tahm Kench lane, like, that is fucking annoying to deal with the Singed, because he's going to flip both of you out of that situation, right? He really punishes a lot of these very passive scaling lanes that we're seeing in really fun ways.
Yeah, and into the Yuumi as well, he's like, if Yuumi's attached, he's like, all right, well, you're both kind of in an awkward spot now.
Or later in the game when Tahm Kench eats somebody, it's like,
yeah,
okay, let's go.
It's funny how, like, people get mad when I say this, but when Yuumi's attached, like, it gives a lot of champions double CC. People are like, but she can't be CC'd, she's attached, like, she can't be affected. I'm like, no, but like, she has been displaced, okay? She is now in the wrong place. She's now not where she wants to be. So Singed can just toss you into a bad spot, and like now the Yuumi's like, ooh, like, we're not actually separate bodies, we're not separate into these. Tahm Kench the same way, like you said, with Devour, so can be very frustrating to lane against that. But I think Lehenz is a player on GenG that, if he's not playing a really fun and interesting champion, was kind of like a weak link for them last season. Wasn't that great overall. I think held Ruler back in 2v2s. But this season, it's like he's showing up to play, and he's really reinvigorated. He's enjoying the game. And I think for a lot of older LCK players, that ends up being like a huge factor in their performance. Do they like the meta? Are they having fun? And if the answer is yes, like, oftentimes they have pop-off seasons. I think that was why Doran did so well last season, is because he really enjoyed the meta. He liked playing Gragas top every game blind and just like actually looking for party cast engages. Well, not party cast, but he was setting up a party. We use the term party cast for a cast that completely misses, but
right.
He was actually not party casting, but it felt like he was having a party.
Yeah.
And I think Lehenz is enjoying this meta. I think he loves playing in Senna lanes. He likes playing Tahm Kench. He likes playing engaged champions, and he's just ready to be like, no, I'm gonna play a lane that might lose, in a perfect world, but I'm just gonna outplay, and we're gonna get ahead. Like the Zeri lane he played, where he's like, nope, no, Zeri is actually strong in this lane. If it's me who's supporting her, and we're gonna get ahead, we're gonna get plates, and we're just gonna go 7-0.
Yeah, and I guess I was kind of encouraged by this game from DAMWON because, like I said, I think this without some luck, GenG loses this series. I think Canyon, he was really struggling on that Volibear in the third game. Like Canyon had like a very uncharacteristically bad game, which was then really well capitalized on by GenG. Plus, they still had the excellent use of Singed in the bottom lane door and also popped off on the GP. So there were a lot of circumstances that led to this GenG victory, including that clutch moment in game one, which ended up being probably like the most pivotal moment of this entire series as to who won this whole best of three, right? So
Yeah.
Considering it goes off of a Baron steal, I don't read this as DAMWON Kia is significantly worse than GenG or anything like that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a pretty close top two, and T1 might be, almost as good as number two. Like it almost feels like we have like a tier that is like GenG is like maybe 10% better than like T1 and DAMWON Kia, who are almost about the same. I was really more disappointed if we move on to the second series for DAMWON. I was pretty disappointed with their series against T1.
They played much worse than that series, I would say. I agree with you.
Because like
they should have won both of these games.
In game one, that game was unlosable, basically for DAMWON, especially after Nuguri randomly just owned in the top lane. And I mean, I don't know if you watched, like, because a lot of analysts watch it like ×2 or ×1 or 1.5 or whatever. I don't know if you heard our cast, but like there were times in that game where I was casting with Valdez and I was like, it's unlosable.
Yes.
Like this game is over. and
to explain why, like Nuguri gets this huge lead on Mordekaiser, right? So like how can Zaya split into Mordekaiser? And the rest of their composition is Ezreal, Karma, Twisted Fate, Trundle. So they have excellent siege, excellent poke. They can reposition, stack one side of the map. They have really good disengage with Karma, Trundle, Pillar. Anybody who engages is just going to get Mordekaiser ulted in 1v1. So it looks really, really fucking huge. I mean, they're playing with a Lee Sin, a Pyke, and a Galio. So they have, and a Camille, T1. So they have just the Zaya to counteract poke or like play from range. So it's a total disaster. Like their win conditions are basically non-existent. Except for Dokdam like forgets how to play Ezreal properly, despite the fact that it's one of his most played champions of all time.
Yeah, I think he was 3-0 on it before this series, and now he's 3-2. So
he's played 47 professional games of Ezreal, by the way, at a 55% win rate. Like it has been with Aphelios, one of his most played champions by a pretty fair margin. Those, he's played about 280 games approximately, and those two champions are 51 games of Aphelios at a 70% win rate, which is very impressive, and then 47.
That's his best champion, yeah.
47 on Ezreal at 55%. So the next one is Kai'Sa at 25 games. So basically he's played Ezreal twice as much as his next play champion. So you would expect for him not to be caught out with with his flash and E up in the front line as many times as he was over the course of this series.
I think so. My biggest issues with that first game, with the Mordekaiser game, was that like DAMWON didn't utilize their topside control very well. Like Nuguri was dove several times after like he had a lead, and the point of the Mordekaiser pick is actually just to be disengaged for the ults and the all-ins, like you said with the ultimate, but also just to be like an extreme weak side champion top side, so they can actually use the Trundle Twisted Fate to make plays bottom side and counter gank top.
Kept where he fucking coming top. Like they would literally not cross map. Like Nuguri would drag 3 or 4 members of T1 into the top side, and instead of just taking an objective on the other side of the map and letting Nuguri die, they would just pile in and all die in the top lane. It was ridiculous. It was terrible macro.
And if you look at some of the ways that they were able to kill Nuguri topside when the rest of DAMWON came, Nuguri didn't play around turret. He was like, I have to get the wave, I'm going to be out here. And so he actually put himself so far away from his turret that he was like, okay, I'm winning, I'm ahead, I'm going to try to push this advantage. It's like, no, you still have to do your job and just sit under turret and ult people under turret. And then the rest of your team's going to come. If you want to play defensively around topside, then you need to be under turret so you can like ult somebody under turret and buy infinite time, and then DAMWON can actually turn this around. Your AD carry has to come up in this comp to actually do damage, because Twisted Fate doesn't do damage. And like, Carry is up there, and he's going to set up stuns, and he's going to be ulting you, and Carry had a fantastic game. But I think Nuggery's positioning really hurt DAMWON trying to play around topside. And they should have just not played around topside, first of all, and like just left him on an island. But he needed to be on the island that is his turret, not about like 2 Mordekaiser ults away from his turret so that he can't actually use the turret defensively. And I was frustrated with that because I thought the draft was beautiful from DAMWON, and the lead they had just made it like literally an unlosable game. I mean, I really did feel like this just cannot go wrong. And then
I agree.
T1 did int a little bit as well, and I was like, oh god, like this is rough. But like at the end of the day, that game was bad. Game 2, I thought DAMWON's draft was a way worse version of the draft they tried to run in game 1, where the Nocturne had like almost no functionality. It's like the Bard ultimate on top of 2 players, and then I'm going to ult over that and get into the backline. No, it was a terrible pick. I didn't like it.
I actually didn't mind it. I didn't mind it very much, and the reason why is that they really like the jungle pool was really pinched this game. Although I will say I think one of the biggest problems with DAMWON Kia is the fact that they've played 8 different jungle champions in 9 games now. So it feels like Canyon's like getting a little bit too fancy for his own good a lot of the time. But with that said, I think Canyon in this game, when you have the kind of backline access that it gives you in like side lane, you know, pick potential with the Twisted Fate, the Nocturne, you can really just overpower people, especially when you're also running 3 teleports because you have a teleport on Ezreal as well. So I wasn't really against this pick so much, and I think that it wasn't really the pick problem that loses this game. I think if Faker doesn't land the 5-man taunt at the Dragon, like this game is probably DAMWON's to lose again. Like I think DAMWON should have won this game, and it was only a really solid play by Faker that allowed T1 to get back into this.
Yeah, I do agree. Also, they started to make plays with the Nocturne through like the later parts of the mid game. They were actually successfully killing the Kalista repeatedly, which was working. Like Guma ended up with 3 deaths that game because he was dove repeatedly. If we talk about that Faker 5-man taunt for a second, it was actually pretty tragic because in the LCK, so I want to talk about this for just a second. In the LCK, we do a replay of every death, basically, no matter what. And I don't always agree with that. And I know a lot of our viewers love it, a lot of our viewers hate it. And it's the LCK way. So we missed the 5-man lead up because of that. And I do think this is going to be a historic moment in the LCK, actually, for replays and how they're used, because in subsequent games, we've shown a little bit less replays, actually. Because this is, in Faker's like later years, perhaps one of his coolest plays and one of the top moments for him in terms of like a big opponent in regular season. Because usually people remember the playoff games more, they remember the finals more, right? But like Chovy had an iconic, I think it was a 3 or 4-man taunt prior to this, like 2 years ago, and it was like on every highlight reel. And like both the English casting of the moment from Atlas and also the Korean casting moment is on like every hype reel and everything. And like I think on both the Korean side and the English side, because of this, we came into it suddenly, like out of a replay moment, will be like lost to history kind of. And it is kind of sad that, I just wanted to put a side note on that. It is kind of sad that like we kind of got replay purgatoried on like one of Faker's hypest plays that he's had this year, and might be the hypest plays done. It might be the hypest one he has this season, because it was just so well set up. They played RNG's style of Galio. They set up strong vision control, tug on objectives, and trap you. Like you either come to this objective and lose a unwinnable fight because you don't have vision, you're playing a more poke oriented style, you can't get in there, you can't see anything, and you have to walk into our trap, or you give us the objective and we win because of it. And Faker had a control ward there. He knew nobody saw him. He knew that there was no way they could actually see. And it was a mistake on DAMWON's part to group up like that, not knowing where Faker was. But Faker knew exactly what he was doing from point A to point B. Like he was like, I have a control ward, I'm gonna flash taunt this. And if you go back and watch it, you could just tell 100%. He's like, we won the game off this. I'm gonna do this. And it was a beautiful play.
Yeah, it was. And I think the other big factor there, too, in the game was that Dokdam was eating every single Kalista ult, just Nautilus getting thrown in his face, and because he was so far forward in all of the team fights again, playing this Ezreal. So I think there were 2 major factors. And yeah, it's a bummer that you miss out on that moment especially when you know that a dragon fight is coming up and like the teams are likely going to be grouped and likely going to be fighting for it. But I think it was somewhat of a desperate play, because if you don't get that, I think that DAMWON just absolutely runs away with this game. So it was another series where, just like the GenG one, we look at this one and we say this probably, like, if DAMWON had played out the scenarios properly, it probably should have been a DAMWON 2-0, or at least we should have been able to see a game 3, because game 1 was such an epic throw from the DAMWON side that it felt kind of unlucky again for DAMWON. And
Yeah.
but small things around vision control, or small things around decision making, and these are, I feel, really fixable problems for DAMWON that probably comes from them bringing this roster together for the first time, because even though they do have some established synergy, not all 5 of these players have played together before, like we see on both T1 and GenG's side.
I think also part of this, like, to give DuckDom a little bit more benefit of the doubt, the time he gets flash taunted, or either flash taunted or flash justice punched by Faker, I can't remember which one. I think it's a flash punch. I think it's in game 1 where he gets caught around the Drake pit. It's again set up by T1 because they are controlling the space around the Drake so well, and in fact are giving up side laning a little bit, losing a little bit of map control and vision outside of the objective they're focused on, because DAMWON's going around clearing that. And they're just willing to be like, nope, this is what we're fighting for. You have to make your choice. Are you going to try to do something else around the map? And macro was pretty terrible for DAMWON this week. Or are you going to try to fight into a precarious position? And when you're in that position as the Ezreal player, you're far forward because you have to be hitting Mystic shots like repeatedly against this tanky comp. Or you are like, what are you even doing with this comp? Like, you have to be hitting those like over and over and over again. So much so that they're like, oh shit, like, we can't hold the Drake. Like, Faker lost a third of his health bar, and like, okay, we got to walk away from this. So he had to put himself into those positions a few times with this comp in order to get value out of it. Otherwise, like, are you shooting like empowered Qs from Karma to like get in there? You know, like, you've got to be doing something, right? So I can forgive some of his positional errors because what he was trying to do was chip away at those health bars. And maybe it means the comps were just bad, like if that's where you have to be, or your synergy isn't built up to do what the comp is trying to do. If like your Ezreal's way out there because he's thinking that's going to be the win condition and he's not on the same page with the rest of the team, who's like, no, like, let's actually try to dive the Callista. There was some big synergy issues there.
I think the problem is that even though you're playing TF Ezreal in both of these games, in game 1 it's clearly a poke composition and a kiting composition, and you have Twisted Fate ult in order to help out in the side lanes when necessary. Whereas when they play Ezreal and TF, because there's a Bard, because there's a Nocturne and a Gwen, this is clearly about diving the back line. And what Ezreal wants to do is not get the upfront poke. You want to wait for that engage and then shoot True Shot Barrage over everybody, and it's your job to clean up, right? So you have to play Ezreal differently in these compositions. And I felt that DAMWON in both cases just didn't really have a clear idea of execute.
Yeah. I think that Twisted Fate is also a champion that relies on getting big tempo advantages in this meta, not always in the past, because this is not really a 1-3-1 wins you the game style meta. Generally speaking, it's later game objective control like Barons that get you vision control, or Elders that win you the game, like Elemental Drakes, whatever, depends on the RNG, like whether it's relevant or not. But the Galio pick in the late game is just so incredibly powerful with Camille. Like, that's what I was talking about in the cast. Like, in the mid game, if you're behind, it's like, oh, you're screwed. But if you go to, like, late game, then actually you just kill the AD carry no matter what. You're too tanky, you get on top of him, like, you win the war of attrition there. He just dies. But the Twisted Fate isn't as powerful in the later parts of the game. It doesn't do damage, so it has a kind of lack of synergy with Ezreal in that regard in terms of scaling. So it was hard for DAMWON to win these late game fights, and T1 knew exactly what they were doing. They're like, cool, we're just going to play Galio again. We're just going to do this again. And I guess my final takeaway from this was it felt like RNG really rubbed off on T1. I think they learned a lot from how RNG played through MSI, and what's really cool about that to me is like Polt was like, yeah, we lost because we didn't get blue side and stuff, and there was all this like fan hate, and everyone's like, oh, T1, like, how could you lose this again? 5th game loss against RNG. This has happened so many times to our region. But actually, T1 came back and played some like goofy games for a while, but then when it came to like the tough series, they're like, oh, we're gonna actually take what we learned from Xiaohu's playstyle and RNG and take the Galio into account here and just come prepared for the Twisted Fate priority that Showmaker showed us last week. I thought it was a fantastic peak for T1 from what we've seen from them so far. Like, started off really rough, got a little bit better, drafting got stronger, and now this is like the best we've seen so far this season. It felt like the win streak T1 from last season.
Yeah, I Figure has a great legacy of playing Galio himself, but probably a refresher course against Xiaohu, like you're saying, who is probably the greatest Galio player in history, among them, let's say. Certainly, I would say the greatest Galio player right now. Helps a lot. Before we talk about T1, because we can talk about their resurgence as well with the Liiv Sandbox game, and I think there's a lot to talk about how they've improved. I do think we should talk about the trade bug in Champion Select and rant about this for a while, because this is something that's absolutely fucking ridiculous that is happening in every single region in the world right now. So as much as you can, Wolf, why don't you unpack this for the audience? Because it hasn't really been very well explained by anybody.
So I don't know what causes this bug, but since the last patch, which was 12.10, since the last patch, there exists this bug that makes it so that during the swap phase of pick and bans, you are unable to swap. Like, sometimes you'll be able to swap some, and then it like bugs at the last second, or one team will be able to swap, but the other team will not. So if you watch the LCK and if you see, there are like some symptoms of this. I'm not going to get really into the weeds, but you could see like one team is swapping, so you like feel like as you're watching, like, okay, thank God the swap bug didn't happen. I like actually will not lose 30 minutes of my life.
Stops.
Yeah, but then you watch the other team and you're like, oh wait, but they didn't move. As far as I can tell, nobody knows yet what is causing this. And it has persisted over 2 patches. And I've only seen it once occur in the LEC, which was like this incredibly long pause while I was trying to watch. And I was like, I just gave up and went to bed. I was like, oh man, this is really long. So what happens next, actually, after when the swap bug occurs, it seems to, this is again from talking to people at Riot Korea and trying to like figure out what's going on. After the swap bug occurs, even in a remade lobby, there is an increased chance that your runes will not properly load into the game. So that's why we've even had swap bugs occur, and then we go into the regame, and then like there's a pause, and then we have to go back to the draft again because the runes didn't load. And I was really frustrated at first because I was like, are these players just like, after they reload into a draft, like not putting the runes in properly? Because none of these players have saved rune pages, right? They're like putting them all in, and I'm like, is this like not a legit thing? But Riot then has to use the footage they've recorded of the players to prove that they in fact did put their runes in. So they have to like slow-mo watch Doran like click all the things like really fast and prove that in fact he did put his runes in correctly.
Oh my god.
And then regame and hope that the runes don't bug again, which is, I don't think we've ever had a case where it has bugged twice in a row for runes.
Okay.
But it begs the question though, should we be using the official tournament client in cases when it is bugged to where about 50% of games need to be remade? It's a tough question to answer. Like, the tournament client is the client that, we use for LAN play, basically, and there's several realms that are in there, and like everybody's connected and stuff, but the reason why we use it no matter what, and we have to go through the draft every time instead of just being like, why can't they just make a lobby and pick the champions they had, is because the way that the API, that all of the stuff that we use, the dragon counter, the gold counter at the top, the panels that come down, like the AR panels that come down, where we have the dun, 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 and we're like, let's talk about these comps. It's all connected to that tournament client draft. So if you
same with all the other overlays, if you guys have been watching LCS and LAC, where they've all bugged the fuck out too.
So if you just made a new lobby with all, and just be like, okay, let's just make a blind pick lobby and like pick all your champions and we just go, it doesn't work with all the pretty and cool stuff. So should there be like an alternate solution for Riot for this, where they just change it and like manually input all those? Is that even possible? Like, should they be focusing on that, or is Riot the developer, like not the esports side of Riot, but like the people who actually work on the client, like, should they be updating this and hot fixing this? Like, something has gone incredibly wrong here, and I think the players are losing because the players also during these bugs are generally not allowed to talk to each other, so they have to like sit here for like 30 minutes being like, I'm so ready to jump in this game, like we need to talk about our level 1s and where we're going to be on the map. It's such a frustrating situation that everyone's dealing with right now, and like I don't know what the answer is, but if this continues for another week of competitive play across the world, it's kind of embarrassing. I think something needs to be done about this.
I mean, it's basically made live League of Legends absolutely unwatchable for me this week because I have to watch so many games that I try not to watch live anyway because it's very inefficient in terms of viewing because there's so much downtime. But now I just don't even know how long it's going to take to get into a game. And then you also have situations where like the XL versus Vitality game that was like delayed, paused, chrono break, then chrono break broke, and then it had to be entirely replayed. It's just it's fucking ridiculous. Like there is no other game in the world with this level of technical problems that occur. I mean, you and I both did Overwatch League, Wolf. Like I can't remember a single technical issue in Overwatch League basically ever.
Yeah,
especially
World Cup had some, but
okay,
there were some World Cup issues, but besides that,
yeah, okay. Well, World Cup. Let's just say that was a lower budget production, but when it's been in Overwatch League in the main studios with the right crew, but especially with the game itself, like the game engine just doesn't break in that game. It's extremely well made. In Counter-Strike, there are very rarely technical problems that cause games to be remade, and even when that happens, it's not like an actual problem with the game itself. It's usually like the server that the game is played on, which is operated by a third party, right? So this is all first party LAN bullshit that's being done by Riot, and like the number of regames and the number of champion bugs that we've had over the years that causes champions to be removed from leagues or tournaments entirely is absurd. Like, it's just absurd. Yeah. Like, no other esport, it's not even close. It's like, out of all the major esports, LoL has like 10x as many technical problems as the next esport, at least.
And I think some of that comes from like all the complex interactions in the game and stuff like that. But something like the swapping of champions, which is integral to how the game is played. Like, we do not pick in order based on role. We pick in order based on snake pick and like pick priority, and that's why swaps exist, right? Like, imagine if the top players just had to pick first no matter what. But yeah, like swapping is literally integral to like how the game begins. So I hope that it's being worked on, and I'm sure it is, but I can only hope that this is like a problem that the source or the reason is not known yet, so that's why it isn't fixed yet, because we just this has to be fixed, and like, or another solution needs to be found, because we like if it goes on for 1 week, it's like, okay, week 2, like we're working on it, like week 3, another week of this means like, okay, this is actually a global disaster, like this has to be fixed.
If you count all the games that have been delayed by this, it is literally, I mean, if you watch a lot of League of Legends, you have now actually wasted many hours of your life waiting for these swaps to occur. It's not a joke. It's like you lose 10 minutes, 15 minutes every time that this happens. And, yeah, and like, with hundreds of games going around the world, that's a lot of hours.
We cast 10 best of 3s a week, or do desk of, you know, I do 2 days of desk, Mal does 3 days of desk. We are all on 5 days a week, and this meta is already generally slow, but like some of our shortest days in the past have now been, you know, increased by the meta and by these bugs to like finishing at 11 p.m. or 11:30 or midnight at times. And so it's affected like our fatigue as casters as well, you know, and like, it's one of those things where like it's almost become a meme, like for us. Even like the play-by-plays are usually kind of looking back like, I don't know, guys, let's find out if we're going to the game. So I'm not here to shit on my employer. I love working with Riot, etc. And like, I'm not trying to say like Riot's not doing the right thing, because they might be, but we've got to like figure out alternative solutions. Riot Korea has at least now started putting lower thirds of stats and interesting anecdotes. So during the pauses, at least like the casters have some stuff to talk about, and like they'll be like, oh, look at Gumusi's like damage share, and like just break down something, or like they'll bring in more specific stats for the pick keys on or whatever. So like Riot Korea is prepared for the things they can control because obviously they're not in control of the client itself. But like I just hope that at the very worst, like when we move to the next patch in 2 weeks' time in Korea or in next week for the other regions, that this is either reduced or gone, or there has to be like a statement. I think like we're working on this, or these production companies have to figure out another way and deattach their API or create like some sort of selection process for these graphics and stuff so they could manually input in the case of a swap bug so we can get right back into game. That's just my personal take. It's been very frustrating for me, and like I said, I don't have anyone to complain to, like, because in Riot Korea they're like,
Yeah, it's
I
not
don't
their
know, man.
fault.
We there's nothing we can do. Like I don't know.
No, it is outrageous though, and like it also is true that they've never actually implemented a professional draft mode. They haven't developed that. It's still the same way that you do it in solo queue because they don't want to put development resources into making that thing, right? Which might be another part of this issue. We haven't had a lot of official messaging around this, despite the amount of kind of outrageous disruption it's caused around the world at this point in time. But I think that they could actually make a tool for draft for the professional game that could potentially alleviate some of these issues as well if they threw their development weight behind it.
Yeah, just to give context of other MOBAs I've worked on, like Heroes of the Storm and Vainglory, there wasn't really a way at the time to access the API. So what would happen at OGN for Heroes of the Storm, for example, would be that the players would actually draft to the referee via words, or occasionally even in some cases in chat. Not great, but like,
but at least there was a failsafe, right?
Exactly. So like they would speak to the referee, and then the referee would like basically say like, is that your final answer? And then like when the answer is yes, they would have like a stopwatch showing them how much time they had left. And then the moment that is said, like that goes to production, and production selects the champion and puts it on the screen. And like that's how it was done in the older Heroes of the Storm days. And I know like we're on very different scales of esports here, but this is the kind of question I'm begging now, is like, should we be doing that? Is that actually better for now? Or should we be like spending 30 minutes and hoping it works? Because like right now it feels like the solution is like, I hope it doesn't break this time. And that concerns me. That's kind of like my final thoughts on this.
All right. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to talk about T1, their improvement, GenG, as well as our middling team showcase of the week. Quick break to remind you guys about esportsbet.io. As Wolf and I were discussing, we do have a pretty big banger match coming in this week between T1 and DRX. Probably the most exciting match of a relatively slow week. And we have really, really good odds on DRX right now. So I do think that T1 is most likely to win this series based on their current form. And DRX, they really haven't shown much because they've been overall against weaker performance, but they've been relatively dominant over that span. Still have not lost a best of 3 overall. However, with over 3.34 odds for DRX, I think this is probably 60% to T1, but with these kind of odds, I'm going to go ahead and put 250 DJT, put 500 DJT overall onto this matchup. And we'll see if DRX can pull off the upset, because the return is obviously going to be huge. If you want to predict some of the other matches in this series, head on over to esportsbet.io. We're back. We focused on DAMWON a little bit, but also T1, I think, had some really interesting answers this week and some very interesting improvements. We were very critical about LCK being slow, not being aggressive enough, etc., etc. Well, this week, we saw T1 go right back to some Lee Sin games for Owner, which I think was very good in the games that they set up against DAMWON Kia, because it gave them a lot of kill pressure in the early game, and we really saw them make a lot of good use of that. We saw T1 return to some more, I would say, normal style drafts, starting with their game against Liiv Sandbox. But as you touched on earlier, Wolf, for me, it was really their vision control was way, way better this week. They were playing a lot of pick compositions, which we know from the end of last split that they're very comfortable with, and they were really playing around vision nicely. And this was the reason why they were so dominant against Sandbox, and then also were able to kind of sneak out a win against DAMWON later.
Yeah, and I think vision control is creeping up as being one of the most important things in this meta, just in general, especially with the slower play styles of a lot of teams where they're looking to kind of slowly edge their way into an objective or like set up control of an objective and force the enemy to walk into them, which is why Kwangdong have looked, totally abysmal because their vision control is just non-existent, and theirs this week was terrible. Like, if you look at Kwangdong, you can, I'm not trying to like bring the topic into another team, but if you look at Kwangdong's games, you can see the problems that not actually carefully and diligently removing wards or setting up wards can lead to, even if you're ahead. And T1 is the opposite of that. They're actually staying ahead, setting up good vision. And again, like these are things I noticed from RNG when I was watching MSI. And it made me really excited because usually, historically speaking, China is not the most like macro-oriented or vision-oriented region. But they were playing very well around that. And then T1 now is doing the same. And T1 in spring season didn't really have to care about wards because they were like, oh, I'm on the inhibitor at 18 minutes, so I don't really need to check anything. I don't need to see anything. And this time around, like they're actually setting up, like we mentioned earlier in the show, like some vision traps and are playing around Keria just getting insane clears. And like when he's on Pike and he has Umberglaive, the amount of power he gave to T1 around topside is why they played so heavily on trying to gank the ungankable Mordekaiser, because he's like, I already have like a ring of vision knowing that DAMWON is not there and how far away they are and when they will be there. And they have no idea if this is a 2-man gank topside or if it's about to be a 4-man gank topside, like, or dive rather, not gank. They just don't know because the vision control is so good.
Yeah, I think it was a massive improvement. I'm not sure what they were doing in the first week of competition. Could have been the MSI hangover, could have been them not really being into practice, could have been them experimenting. I think sometimes successfully, other times not so much. But at least with T1, they were very, I would say, quite convincing in their sandbox win. And even though I think probably they should have lost both games against DAMWON, they have this tenacity that gets them back into these games, and they find those win conditions even in unlikely situations, which was true in week 1 as well. It was like when we see them versus KT like sneaking the Baron and taking this victory, they find ways to win in very, very tough situations. And that is one of the principal points of expertise of T1's roster, is that you cannot count them out because they will take stock of the tools that they have available and then deploy those tools really expertly and in unexpected ways for their opponents. So it's that kind of adaptability and creativity that makes them so exciting to watch. And
yeah, they can see win conditions that the enemy team can't like fathom or figure out, and they can set up traps. And like when you watch their comms as well, I know for the Western fans it's kind of hard to see it, and we do translate the comms sometimes we don't. It really just depends on, like, for me at least, if I'm at the helm for like, do I translate this or not, is like whether it seems relevant to me at the time.
Yeah.
But like T1 has pretty decisive shot calling, and you could see like they ask questions. There was a really cool kind of setup for the KT series where they actually showed some of the comms, like I don't know what to call it, like an open mic segment that Riot released, and it's subtitled. And like you could see like they ask questions like, yo, I think like Guma will be like, yo, I think we could actually take Baron right now. I don't think they can see it. What do you guys think? And like, there's a thing of like, yeah, let's try that. Like, be ready to back off. Like, if they come over, we're gonna do this. Like, they don't just like do these things somewhat randomly. They're like, no, I think if you push bot, we can sell this. Just kind of like these kind of conversations they have, which in my experience in Korean shot calling is quite rare. It's usually like there's a hierarchy and one person says, we do this, and everyone says, all right, okay, Hyung, we're going. And the way that T1 communicates is often like, hey, do you think we could, is this possible? Like, do you think we can pull this off? And like, sometimes the answer is like, hell no, dude, like, no, let's not do that. But like, very often like, all right, let's try to push for that and see what happens. This is basically a lost game, but like, we might be able to like play this miracle thing and actually win the game. It's reminiscent of DAMWON in 2021, where DAMWON would win so many games. They're like behind 6,000 gold and their comp sucks at late game. But they actually just have one beautiful team fight where they set up the perfect pick onto the enemy 80 carry, and then it's just like, oh, okay, we win no matter what. It's fine. Like, that is so true of T1, though. The tenacity and the late game wins, where they stole a game off Nongshim, frankly, like, stole 2 games off of KT, in my opinion, then now have stolen basically 2 games against DAMWON that, like, in terms of what we understand about, like, the meta and how their late game works, should not have been possible. And that's what's scary about this team right now. And that's what makes a team really scary in international events. We're still far, far away from that, but that's how you like lift a global trophy is like, oh, you messed up in draft, but you still pulled off the win. You still have that clutch factor. That's what wins titles.
That's true. And let's shift to GenG real quick, because they are still here on top of the league, undefeated with T1 and DRX, but DRX has had we'll get to DRX. They've had a much easier schedule. They might be frauds. Let's put it that way. But GenG, at least, I mean, I don't know what there is really to say about them. Like, they just look extremely comfortable in this meta. We haven't seen a great diversity of styles from them. It's been a lot of Chovy on Chovy picks, like Azir, Corki, and Ahri, right? It's been a lot of Ruler on scaling late game picks, like Jinx and Zeri and Twitch. It's been Lehens being wacky and busting out the Singed for a couple of games, right? But for the most part, it's been really standard meta pickups. They have a lot of jungle priority picks because of the bans that are typically issued against them. So, you know, it feels like a very comfortable meta for them. It feels like they haven't had to show a lot, and that why not just keep winning in the way that they are going to keep winning as long as no one can stop them, because Chovy is doing 32% of his team's damage and is the highest in the league, is head and shoulders the highest league in the league in terms of damage per minute. He's been absolutely dominant on these poke champions, and they've been doing a very good job of controlling objectives with these champions.
I think we can actually, for the first time since I started casting LCK, say Chovy is by far the best mid laner right now. Like, by far. I don't think anyone is coming close to him right now in the LCK. And it's the first time I could definitively say that since I started casting. I mean, there were a lot of people who said that in the Griffin days. And some who would even argue on his DRX time, but I legitimately believe he has leveled up his decision making,
yes,
without sacrificing his extreme lane prowess and CS gathering, which is something that like everyone has been waiting. Like, can Chovy actually like be able to like break into being able to do both?
Right, because
like, it felt impossible.
You knew he had the Chovy lane kingdom, right? And even at this point in time, he has the highest goal difference at 10 of any player in LCK, right? He has the highest CS per minute of any player in LCK. And it's not just that he's being dumped resources, because obviously he is being dumped resources, right? He has given more of the post 15 CS than most other players, but sometimes he wouldn't do things with those resources, or he would make bad macro plays. And maybe I'm not completely sold, because maybe it's just these poke picks that he's like, or, you know, that he's really comfortable on Wolf, and he knows how to play these champions around objectives. But for now, it does look like that problem has shown significant improvement. And
but his Ahri damage numbers compared to other Ahris in the league as well. His Victor, which also looked really good in a meta where like Victor looks not so good and like no one is playing it well. I don't know if you caught his interview after when he won that series against Reddit. He said in the interview, like, I actually was playing this solo queue game last night, and I was kind of spamming Victor a little bit last night, and I played against a really good Ahri player, and I just beat him in lane, and so I just felt like, yeah, I can win this Victor Ahri matchup. I was playing it last night, and like, so that's why we picked Victor. Because the interviewer was like, yeah, it doesn't seem too strong right now, but you had a great performance. Like, what are your thoughts on Victor? And he was just like, yeah, I was kind of spamming it, and I played against a good Ahri last night. I was feeling like, yeah, I could do that again. And then he played against Lava, who's one of the first Ahri players, you know, with Faker last year to actually start picking up the champion a lot. And I just think his brain is in like such the perfect spot where he's finally figured out like how to be amazing in Lane Kingdom, but also not be selfish about it. And people would speculate that the reason why his CS numbers were so high was because he just doesn't even listen to his team and he's very selfish. And like, I don't think that was true, but his decision making was bad, right? And like, now the team has kind of figured out how to facilitate this, and Ruler is willing to give up more CS to him, and they're playing around it. And this is like week 2 of the best version of Chovy I've seen in 2 years. And so what happens when it's like week 8, week 9, and they've even perfected this more? I think right now we should all be predicting GenG is lifting that LCK trophy. Like I
Hey,
think
there could be a
that's the
huge meta
only prediction to
shift.
make.
There could be a
Sure.
huge meta
I'm just
shift.
saying right now. Right now.
I'm not willing to do that yet because I think a lot of these champions are probably going to be nerfed because it is the balanced team likes to nerf these champions when we have like the Corki Azir metas because it can be horrendously boring for a lot of people. Not to say that Chovy has a weak champion pool, but the other thing is Chovy's only 21, so he still has a lot of probably development left, and it wouldn't surprise me that now he's a bit older, a bit more mature. I mean, there are several changes to Chovy, right? One of which is obviously he's older now. Maybe he is ready for this point in his career, maybe a little bit more humble, given that he still hasn't won a title, shockingly, despite all of his consistently high level of play over the years. And maybe that has finally gotten to him, and he's willing to like seriously examine his play and make some improvements in a more humble way. Another reason could be look at his coaches now. Like Score is I don't know. I'm not going to make an opinion about whether he respected his previous coaches, but Score is one of the most important League of Legends players of all time. He is almost certainly the best jungler to have ever played the game, and so to have him come back and be the coach now alongside Mafa, who is another longtime LCK player, perhaps he's in a position where he respects the coaches more now, and so their advice is better listened to him by him, or he just frankly has better coaches. That's another option as well. So I think there are probably a lot of factors that are going into this, and maybe taking second again last split woke something up in him. Maybe it's the champion pool. We actually are going to have Arnold Herr, the CEO of GenG, on next week, so we can ask him about the team dynamic and his experiences with Chovy. So he'll be on the show to do I think a more in-depth dive on them, so we get some more.
Yeah, I just think that like both Faker and Showmaker are the people that, if anyone who disagrees that Chovy is the best mid laner in the LCK right now, are the people that fans will bring up. But I just think that even with like Faker's amazing Flash 5-man taunt, stuff like that, like the consistency hasn't been there the same way Chovy has been consistent this season. Showmaker hasn't either. And it just feels weird to me that people have been saying actually Chovy is the best mid laner forever. And now that he actually is, like, everyone's pretty quiet about it. I'm like, no, like, we should all be like, you guys should all be like shouting from the mountaintops, like, this is his time. Like
the razor cake is real, dude. The razor cake is real. Although, well, because we're going to talk a lot about GenG next week, let's transition the conversation to talking about the final undefeated team, which is DRX, and also talk about Zeka, who's been quietly really pretty good in this meta as well. DRX, I think, is probably the biggest surprise coming into this split in terms of the level of performance that they've had, although it does come with the major caveat that their games have been against Nongshim, Fredit Brion, Hanwha Life, and Guangdong Freaks, the last one this week.
Yeah.
However, many of these games have been very one-sided and very convincing, and it leads us into what will be the major match coming up this next week, which is T1 versus DRX, which in a week of not very exciting games that we will be experiencing, that is definitively the best game on paper, best game that we will.
Yeah, I'm very excited for that one too, because I think that T1 will be pushed in different ways by Deft's playstyle, and they'll have to draft differently, because Zeka also is kind of just becoming super versatile as a player. At first we were like, oh yeah, his Akali is pretty good, everything else is very forgettable. And like when he played Corki last season, we were like, ooh, like you're gonna have to play a little bit smarter than that, or like maybe this is not the pick for you. And then now he's playing Corki well, he's playing Akali still. I think he's now 8-0 on the champion after that win yesterday. He's either 7-0 or 8-0 on it career, which is
I will check.
Pretty incredible. And he
is 14 games, 85% win rate.
Oh, okay, maybe this is only in LCK. Like that would probably be his LPL time.
Yeah.
Included in that, but he's just like the guy is suddenly coming to his own, and yeah, has weaker opponents, but he has no fear. He plays really well around Deft, who also plays very aggressively.
Confirmed it's LCK only. I just checked all his LCK seasons. He's 8-0 LCK.
There you go. So he's playing well. Kingen, who is possibly the most forgettable top laner until now in the LCK.
He had a fucking banging week, dude. That second game against Guangdong Freaks, where he basically just solo won them the game at Herald, was extremely impressive.
Yeah, he's like the only Ornn player who will flash on the play like every objective, and it will be worth it. He's gotten so many flash knockups. He's flashed to make sure he can recharge his ult before people get away. So he gets like the second, just so people understand this, if you flash to hit the second part of your ultimate, it means there's less time for the enemy to avoid the second part, which is the big knockup.
Yep.
And it's something that players don't think about very often because it feels often very wasteful to flash to hit your ult that you're already lined up to hit anyways. And a lot of players will try to prevent the Ornn from hitting the second part of his ultimate, so it actually just passes through him and doesn't happen. So there's a lot of ways that like Ornn ults go wrong, but usually as a player you often think like, I think I have about exactly this much time to avoid this or get ready to flash out of this, because you know the travel time of the Ornn Horn and when it's recast basically to hit you. But he actually flashes to speed up the recast time and then is getting these crazy knockups. So it's very difficult to predict in those cases. Like, he's kind of changing the way Ornn is played in the LCK. He's also, you know, flashing for some knockups with just his regular kit as well, and setting up for some good plays there. The guy is Ornn needs to be banned against this team, and they're playing a comp that does well with Ornn.
Yeah, that play was so hot and dirty. It was actually the #1 video on Ornhub this week. Really? Nothing?
Nah, I didn't get it. I didn't get where you were going with it, and then I was like, my brain was processing, is that like this name of the subreddit for like Ornn mains? And then sorry, I can't access that in Korea without a VPN. I just can't go to Ornhub.com.
You can't go to Ornhub.
Pull up my VPN.
God damn, not even laughing at my good jokes. Fuck you, Wolf. But yeah, it was really impressive. Like you're saying, the flash into the 5-man knockup into the 2-man knockup to like kill Teddy before he could really do anything in that fight. It was really gross, Ornn play. And I think it just shows DRX has been on point when it comes to, it looks like a good meta for them. We've talked about it. Kingen being on the tanks, Deft being able to just kind of slowly scale into the late game. He's feeling great about everything. Also, Kalista being in meta, which has become one of Deft's better champions, and we've seen how that works. Now they've got, they have Beryl on this roster now who can provide significant amounts of shot calling. Pioshik, who has looked good in previous years on bad teams, but hasn't actually been able to be around good players in quite a long time. Seems to be coming into his own as well. And Zeka seems at least to have some versatility between like the pick and the backline assassin engaged champions with Akali. So, I mean, I feel pretty good about DRX. I will say that I do have hesitations about them because even though they are winning fights by out team fighting and out skilling people, they still often take very bad fights. Like they opt into dumb fights that they win, and against good teams, they will lose those fights. So sometimes their macro choices are like really questionable, or they don't realize that they can just give up this objective, or they're not really on a power spike, or they don't fully have everybody there. And so to me, like, I do see some pretty significant flaws in their play. But when your opponents have been so weak, it really hasn't been an issue for them.
Yeah, and like, I want to talk about the DRX versus Guangdong draft, where they drafted, I'll just read out the champions they put together. They had Sejuani Viego topside, which is, something that Brendan Valdez, one of my co-casters on the LCK, like, he really thinks this combo kind of sucks and is overrated because it has very rarely worked out. Did work out in this case.
Okay,
I
talked to Alorum, Sejuani top master, and he loves this combo as a top laner, Sejuani, because you can trigger the Sejuani stuns so quickly with Viego, and you really can just hard CC people. But if we're going to talk about the horrific Herald fight that they took, and like Kingen didn't even ult, and like, I mean, it was bad. It was a bad decision, badly played.
We were yelling at the TV at that one.
Yeah,
like we have a TV, we watch it, we yell at it. But
the thing that tilted me about this game, Wolf, is like Deft is popping off on Kalista, right? And you have this like tier Corki who's still charging up his item. And it's like, why the fuck are you playing into top side when you could just snowball your Kalista bottom side? Just give up the fucking Herald. Who cares about this Herald? It doesn't help you win this fucking game. Sit back, scale up, don't fight the stupid topside fight. Just keep on snowballing Deft. Meanwhile, Deft's ahead. He's not even in the fight. He's just like in bottom lane and then moves up to mid lane. I was tearing my hair out. I was like, this is so stupid.
That play was bad. That play was really bad. But just in general, also, Corki and Kalista together as a DPS duo for this comp, I have serious issues with this because you're basically saying, I'm playing the late game, but only if we also win the early game really well. Like, it's very much like a,
I think you can do
play
it
around Deft, but also play around Zeka, but then also we're going to go for the top side control. I
think you can do it.
Punishes you.
I think you can do it, but you absolutely can't do it like that. And so the fact that they won this game was sort of egregious. And it was situations like this. I'm like, do you guys even know how you want to win this game? It's like, there's a really obvious snowball that you should be rolling down the hill right now. And you're just on a completely different fucking hill. And why are you there? Why are you there?
Yeah, it was like they were like, why don't we run? Like they had a snowball, like a pretty big one. They were about to roll down, and like they could have rolled it down the like snowy mountain, but they decided to roll it down like the sand dune. I'm like, ooh, that's not the hill you want to roll this one down. That's gonna melt, man.
So they won anyway, but it did hurt me. It did hurt me.
Now, the second win in that series was, and this is very fresh in my mind, that was obviously the King and Ornn knockup game, but the way they played around Vision was super good, and Deft's Twitch was also very exciting to watch. Ruler, the only other player to play it so far, and it just felt so smart because they're like, okay, what's the worst team at Vision? It's Kwangdong. Like, they don't check, and we have 3 champions that can basically go invisible. And we could play around the fact that this team is never going to be able to know where Twitch or Akali are at any time, and probably won't be able to track Viego very well and Snowball. And then when they got a lead, like Zeka was in the enemy jungle, it felt like half the game. Like he was just like, oh yeah, I'm on your wolves. Like, maybe you don't know, you don't have any vision, and like I will kill you. So it was fun to see that, and I think that DRX's coaching staff is really preparing for each and every series based on their opponent's strengths and weaknesses, which is something that DRX has always been very good at, which is why we always say they play to their opponent's level. As it feels like they're really ready to try to counter what their opponent's strategies are and best them at it. And it did feel like in the second game they absolutely did. So I'm optimistic about DRX. I think T1 will probably still 2-0 them, but I think it will be close games. I think it will be fun games to watch. That's definitely a series to look forward to. And like, there's a lot to be hopeful about here, and it is Deft's last season. And he finally like really officially said it, so like it's no longer a like every time I say this, the Deft fans get in my DMs and tell me like, no, you don't even know that. I'm like, no, he actually is retiring after the season. So what legacy he leaves behind is what we're all looking forward to.
I mean, he's playing really well so far. Seems highly motivated. Seems like this is a good team in this meta as well. This meta is not likely to fully disappear because it has changed the game, pretty at a fundamental level. So hopefully DRX is going to be a team that might be able to squeak into Worlds at the fourth spot, or perhaps third. I mean, depending on what DAMWON Kia does with DRX's strong start. Certainly they're making an argument for themselves to make a deep run here. So finally, we are going to start adding some segments, guys. Now, obviously, we spent a lot of time talking about the big banger matchups that happened this last week and the top 4 teams, but we also want to spend some time every week highlighting some of the worst teams or mediocre teams. So we'll do the middling team of the week, and we've picked Liiv Sandbox this week. Liiv Sandbox has been a very fun team to watch so far this season. They did, I think, pull off what I would consider an upset over KT. And then they at least like showed at least some kind of life against T1, even though they still lost pretty convincingly. But this is a team that I think a lot of people enjoy watching whether they win or lose, because they play this like all-in pick composition style that is entertaining, if nothing else.
Yeah, and that's why they are called like the romantic team. That's their nickname in Korea, and like we've kind of embraced it on the global broadcast as well. It's a very aggressive play style, and it's very much dive oriented. And that series against KT was like the least clean 2-0 I've ever seen, but I do agree that it was an upset. Hirai, the coach of KT Rolster, who's been a coach since like before Faker even like stepped onto the stage. Like the guy, I talk about this guy all the time because he was literally a legend in StarCraft 2.
Yes.
In terms of
From
coaching,
Incredible Miracle.
Yeah, he was coaching Incredible Miracle, which he then went on to coach in League of Legends and many teams in League. But I don't think I've seen him as angry in all of my time and experiences with Hirai as I saw him after that loss after game 1. And in game 2, I averted my eyes because he did not look happy after that game 1 loss. And like Arya had a very bad quirky game, and frankly like a pretty bad quirky series overall. Liiv Sandbox, just they will skill check you. Like that's what they do. They're like, I will skill check you. Like, are you in the wrong place at the wrong time? Did you step 1 foot across the line? Like, they're such a great like 7th, 8th, 9th place team that like will just be like, oh, you prepared for the stronger team this week, but not us. Oh, you're feeling like you're just gonna walk over. Welcome to the trap game.
And their style is, even though I won't say that they've been hugely successful, their style actually has started to percolate out to other regions. Like we've started to see the Vi Ari combo that they've become quite well known for, even in these very early days of the summer split, start to hit other regions as well. Like Vi is starting to be banned against them by good teams because Kroko is just such a, I'm not gonna say good, unpredictable. Annoying. Annoying with Vi.
He's like the solo queue nightmare, but in your pro game.
Like, is he coming at a weird angle behind you because he's in your jungle, like behind you in lane? Is he going to tower dive you? Possibly. Or are he and Closer going to come over the wall at exactly the same time and try and dumpster you? Possibly. So I think good teams, it's not that you either just ban the Vi, or I think you can play around it well enough if you understand what's going on within the game. But otherwise, this team, they really like some of these like all-in AD carries. If you guys haven't watched their games, like they will just go into your backline with Kai'Sa. They fucking love playing Sylas for Closer. So it's a lot of really flashy champions and really aggressive play that makes games fun, if nothing else.
I think that also this team is so reliant on their comfort picks, which is why you'll see like Closer play Zoe in that last KT game, where I don't think the comp necessarily really called for that at all. I mean, it wasn't a terrible pick, but you could just see how much more comfortable he was on the champion versus some of the other champions he's played. Like the Sylas is one of the ones he has been comfortable with in the past, but like hasn't looked very good on it despite the buffs to Sylas. And like he played against Showmaker in the first time he played it, so that's obviously a struggle. But Sandbox also will play a more slow composition way more aggressively than it's necessarily supposed to be played, and sometimes to their success, sometimes to their detriment. I think it's a team to look out for because even though they're not winning, and I think they are still like maybe bottom 3, bottom 4 at best right now in the LCK, they are pushing the meta in a different direction, and I think teams will probably still learn from the successes that they have, because like you said, the Vi pick, it was, first played by Owner and T1 at MSI, and it was, it was discussed a lot before MSI, like teams were saying, oh, this pick might be strong, but then like popularized now, I would say, by Liiv Sandbox, because they're not hovering it and drafting one like, ooh, we could do this. They're actually doing it, and they're playing around it, and they're setting up good plays with it. So I think teams will change their thinking if Liiv Sandbox can continue to find some success with these styles of picks. And it's a team to watch out for because like they have so many different aspects of their team itself, like the roster. Like Dove is a top laner who's actually a mid laner. Closer, it was an assassin player under Faker and it was playing like Irelia mid and stuff like that. So he's got this extra X factor in terms of assassin play that might come out at times. It's not the greatest meta for it, but they're fun to watch because you just don't know what you're gonna get, and it's frustrating to watch also sometimes because you know what you could get, and then they're like, "Nah, it's Zoe here." I'm like, "Ooh, okay." Like,
I think my favorite like Liiv Sandbox moment from this past week was Closer doing very well as Ari into Faker's Lissandra in lane, and then randomly TPing into the top turret, and then just losing all the pressure and all the tempo to like save Dove, who is doing horrible in the Fiora versus Jace matchup. And then he like recalls and then walks back to lane, and like two, 3 minion waves just crash into his turret, and like it was just a complete fucking disaster. And then Faker's just unlocked on the map, and I was like, I don't know who made that call. If Dove's just like crying for help, or like Closer thought by it was pre 14 minutes, by the way, so he's just TPing onto Dove's turret. Awful. It was so bad. So
I remember this moment. We were like literally saying on the cast, like, "Wow, look at the pressure he has on Faker in lane." And then he teleports, and we're like, "Never mind. Look at this. Like, look at it's all gone." Like, oh,
it's like, dude, if you want to help Dove, just push out your mid and then start recall, TP mid, push again, and start roaming. Right? Like, put pressure on a different way. Don't waste your TP. So on one hand, you get some really interesting upsets, like we saw from Liiv Sandbox just playing extremely aggressively into KT and taking home a victory that I would say they probably didn't deserve, and I don't think they're going to be ahead of KT at the end of the standings by the time the dust settles at the end of the season. But they will pull off these wins, and they will also make really hilariously bad mistakes.
I want to explain, since we're talking about Liiv Sandbox, I want to explain Liiv Sandbox's like sponsors to people, because a lot of people ask me about this. Sometimes I found that like a lot of people who watch the LCK or are newer aren't as familiar with some of the big names and big sponsors that are in the LCK because they just haven't watched that much Korean esports, or some of the sponsors changed. Most people are familiar with SKT and KT because they're like the biggest and oldest ones, right? But so Liiv is the brand name for a huge bank in Korea called Kookmin Bank. And it's kind of like one of their big, like, I don't want to call it a rebrand, but it's like part of their like whole, like, if you're part of our bank, this is like the things you can do and stuff like that. So that's why they're Liiv Sandbox, because they basically are title sponsored by a bank, while also being Sandbox, which is one of the biggest content creation companies in Korea. Some of the, so they're what like Koreans call an MCN company, which is like, they run YouTube channels and help facilitate YouTube channels and get ads and sponsors for YouTubers. So if you're like an up-and-coming YouTuber in Korea, like one of the companies you might want to get signed by is Sandbox, because they're going to funnel like money and sponsorship deals and like opportunities to you on your YouTube channel so that you can continue to grow and collab with other YouTubers and stuff like that. So it is a pretty big company, and it's a very well-known company in Korea. So I just wanted to like kind of put that out there, since we're like kind of centralizing this topic on Sandbox. Like, this is not an org that's just kind of like some random org, because I found that people generally believe like Liiv Sandbox is just like some weird shadow org, or like, well, what's the weird name? What's going on that? Like, I don't know, how did they get a franchise spot? Like, this team has a lot of money, and they have a lot of their notoriety in Korea, which is why I think the fans are well with them. We now have Shinhan sponsoring DRX, not as a title sponsor, but that's another bank in Korea. Liiv Sandbox, obviously the KB sponsor. We have Woori Unhang, Woori Bank sponsoring the LCK in general. So
the banks are coming back. And by the way, guys, just as
this is Brood War money coming in, right?
I was gonna say, like, here's your fucking history lesson, guys, about Korean esports. Is like what you may not know is that back in the day when it was Pro League or OSL or MSL, so many on GameNet Star League, right, or NBC Game Star League, for those of you who don't know the acronyms, these were the big tournaments that happened in Brood War, and oftentimes the seasons would be named like Shinhan Bank OSL or whatever. So there would be really big banking sponsors that would be involved in a title sponsorship capacity for these leagues, and that really didn't exist, surprisingly, for most of League of Legends up until this point.
Yeah. And it's crazy. Like, I don't know if like Riot doesn't allow them to attach the name. Like, maybe like getting a name sponsor isn't allowed in the LCK, because I feel like Woori has so much sponsorship. Like, they probably wanted to do it, you know, like to be like Woori LCK Summer. I don't know if that's allowed because no other region has ever had like a sponsor in
Yeah,
the
we used to
name
have it
that I can
obviously
think of.
for Champions on OGN.
For Champions, yeah.
We used to have that, but I don't sure for Riot. Like I would think for enough money they would do it, but it's a long,
Yeah.
it's a multi-decade at this point legacy of doing this in Korea. So there's certainly precedent.
Yeah. I just wanted to like put it out there. This team is not like, you know, just some like team that like put a bunch of investment capital together and we're like, let's buy an LCK team. Let's see how that goes. It's a legit org with big money sponsors behind it. So, and also KB, the colors that they used for Liiv Sandbox, like the gold and black, is the colors that it's basically the colors of their bank, but all of their sports teams have the same colors as well. So, when I saw the sponsorship come through, I was like, oh, this is like a legit sports org now. And I think that's very exciting to me when I see that come through. And we've seen a lot of teams kind of adopt the sports jersey type thing in Korean esports for a while. It doesn't always stick. It doesn't last forever. I mean, T1 has like the track jacket style of like, yeah, I'm wearing my sports jacket out. So I hope this org does well because I think that for people who like watching, you know, professional volleyball or baseball and stuff, like who are familiar with the colors, are going to be like, yeah, that's my team. I want to follow that team in another sport too. Like I heard they do the video game thing over there. Like I want to watch that. So I hope they do well. I hope they bounce back because I think their best roster was the Summit roster, and you know, he went to NA retirement, and then he was like, maybe it's too soon, and now he's over there in China.
He'll be back, I think. He's one of those players that I think will be back in Korea. I think he probably just had limited options given his situation.
Mid-season, yeah.
Yeah, mid-season, leaving C9, but we'll see where he goes. Okay, well, thank you. That was our middling team of the week for Liiv Sandbox. We'll see if we get another, we'll pick these based on which teams do well in a given week or have some interesting games to talk about them if they're really showing their own unique style and flavor. Otherwise, of course, we'll be focused on many of the top matches. Not that many this week. Again, we'll be looking at T1 versus DRX, certainly, but next week we'll have a guest on to discuss GenG. It is the CEO, Arnold Herr, who knows all about the inner workings of GenG, so we'll pick his brain on forming the roster, coaching, how things are going, his opinion of some of the structure of the other teams. He's a friend of both of ours, so we know he has a lot of opinions. We'll see which ones he chooses to share with you instead of just privately to us, because he shares them with me all the time. So I'm hoping he gives you guys some juice. We'll see you then.